In the sweltering summer of 100 BCE, Rome was already a city that thought itself eternal. The streets bustled with merchants shouting over the clatter of carts. Patricians in white togas strode past barefoot slaves, and the air was thick with the scent of olive oil, sweat, and ambition. On the 12th or 13th day of July, historians never agreed which. A child was born in a modest but ancient house in the Subura district, a neighborhood wedged between the grandeur of the Forum and the poorer, livelier quarters of the city. This boy would one day be known as Gaius Julius Caesar. His family name carried weight in Rome's history books, but little in Rome's treasury. The Julii were an old patrician clan, tracing their mythical lineage to Iulus, the supposed son of Aeneas, the Trojan hero who fled to Italy after the fall of Troy. To the Roman mind, this meant Caesar's bloodline ran all the way back to Venus herself, but noble ancestry did not guarantee political power in the cutthroat world of the late Republic, not without wealth, military success, and the loyalty of the masses. Caesar's father, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, served as a praetor, a judicial magistrate in Rome's hierarchy. His career was respectable but unremarkable, and he would die suddenly when Caesar was only 15. His mother, Aurelia Cotta, however, was a force to be reckoned with. Intelligent, disciplined, and fiercely proud of her family, she came from the influential Aurelie, one of Rome's most distinguished plebeian lines. Aurelia would become one of the most important influences in her son's life, shaping his character with an iron sense of duty, political cunning, and the polished manners expected of Rome's elite. The Rome into which Caesar was born was a city in the midst of transformation and turmoil. The Republic was creaking under the weight of its conquests. The victories of Rome's armies had flooded the city with slaves, exotic goods, and staggering wealth, but also with corruption, political factionalism, and unrest among the common people. Patricians and plebeians eyed each other with suspicion, and the Senate's authority was often challenged by ambitious generals seeking glory for themselves. In this tense environment, Caesar's upbringing was a balancing act between the privileges of his patrician birth and the political realities of a family that needed to secure alliances to survive. His early education was entrusted to private tutors who drilled him in reading, writing, arithmetic, and the complex traditions of Roman religion and law. He was introduced to the legends of Rome, the orations of great statesmen, and the disciplined virtues of Roman generals. Latin was his mother tongue, but Greek, the language of philosophy, art, and diplomacy, was also part of his studies, for no educated Roman could claim sophistication without it. Even as a boy, Caesar was ambitious. Neighbors and relatives recalled that he carried himself with unusual confidence for his age, speaking with clarity and conviction even among adults. There was in him a quiet certainty, as though he already knew he was destined for more than a comfortable but ordinary life in the Senate. His family's relative poverty, compared to the great patrician houses, may have fueled this ambition, where others inherited their influence. Caesar would have to earn his. From an early age, Aurelia impressed upon him the importance of political alliances. Through her, Caesar would come to understand that Rome was not merely governed by laws but by relationships, friendships, debts, and favors owed. The subtle dance of flattery and persuasion, the careful display of generosity to the right people, and the quiet promise of future rewards would all become part of his political arsenal in later life. The boy also showed signs of the physical endurance and determination that would serve him in the military. Like all patrician youths, he was trained in riding, swimming, and the use of arms. But unlike many nobles who treated such training as a formality, Caesar took it seriously, practicing with a focus that drew admiration. He was tall for his age, with sharp features, dark, watchful eyes, and according to later descriptions, a pale complexion that contrasted with the hardiness of his build. Rome itself was a classroom for the young Caesar. The processions of victorious generals, the trials of famous politicians in the Forum, the speeches delivered from the rostra, all of these were lessons in power. He would watch, listen, and remember. Even the violent street clashes between rival political gangs left an impression in Rome. Ideals mattered, but force decided outcomes. Caesar's earliest years were not marked by personal tragedy or great hardship, at least not yet. But the world around him was simmering with the forces that would shape his destiny. The struggle between the populares, who championed the cause of the common people, and the optimates, who defended the Senate's authority, was intensifying. Soon, these political factions would turn Rome's streets into battlefields. For now, though, Caesar was simply a boy in a city at the height of its power, a city that demanded much from its citizens and gave even more to those bold enough to take it. The foundations of his character, ambition, charm, intelligence, and an unshakable sense of his own worth, were already laid. The Republic would test these qualities again and again. No one in the Suburra could have guessed that the child in the modest patrician house, playing under the watchful eye of his mother, would one day bring that very republic to its knees, and in doing so, carve his name into the bedrock of history. The Rome of Caesar's youth was a city of contrasts, a place where marble temples loomed over crooked alleyways, where senators in gleaming togas debated the fate of the republic while pickpockets slipped through the crowds, and where triumphal processions of victorious generals marched past long lines of starving citizens waiting for free grain. It was both a beacon of civilization and a powder keg waiting to explode. By the time Caesar was old enough to understand the conversations of adults, he had begun to hear names whispered with awe or hatred: Marius, Sulla, Cinna. These men were more than politicians. They were the giants whose power struggles shook the city. Caesar's own family had ties to these conflicts. His Aunt Julia was married to Gaius Marius, the brilliant general and leader of the Populares faction, those who claimed to fight for the rights of the common people against the entrenched power of the Senate's optimates. This connection would bring Caesar both opportunity and danger. As a boy, Caesar spent much of his time under the watchful gaze of his mother Aurelia. She was determined that her son not merely inherit the privileges of patrician birth, but master the arts of leadership. Lessons in literature and history were paired with lessons in demeanor: how to walk, how to hold his head high, how to speak with just the right mixture of confidence and courtesy. In a society obsessed with public image, appearance was half the battle. His father, when present, provided the formal example of Roman duty, fulfilling civic obligations, presiding over legal matters, and maintaining the family's honor. But Caesar's father was often occupied with his own career, and it was Aurelia's influence that shaped the boy's daily life. She ensured that he was educated not only in Latin but also in Greek, the language of diplomacy and high culture. From Greek tutors, Caesar learned the epics of Homer, the histories of Herodotus and Thucydides, and the philosophical debates of Plato and Aristotle. These were not just stories to him, they were models for how a man could achieve greatness and secure immortality through deeds. Life in the Suburra, though respectable by patrician standards, exposed Caesar to the bustling energy of ordinary Romans. The streets teemed with tradesmen, foreign merchants, freedmen trying to rise in status, and slaves from all corners of the Republic's vast territories. He saw firsthand the diversity of the empire. Africans, Gauls, Greeks, Syrians, and Spaniards all moving through the same crowded lanes. For a boy with ambition, this was a reminder that Rome's power extended far beyond the Tiber, and that a career in war could bring both glory and fortune. The political tensions of the Republic were not abstract ideas to Caesar. As the rivalry between his uncle Marius and his enemy Sulla intensified, violence began to spill into the streets. Senators were murdered, tribunals turned into political weapons, and gangs loyal to one faction or another clashed openly. Even as a youth, Caesar must have understood that the Republic's vaunted laws could be bent or broken when ambition demanded it. He also grew up in a society that prized public speaking above all other skills. In Rome, a man's reputation could be made or destroyed in the forum by the strength of his oratory. Caesar, still in his teens, began practicing speeches before small audiences, servants, relatives, and sympathetic neighbors. He learned the importance of rhythm in speech, of knowing when to stir emotion and when to appeal to reason. Later in life, this skill would win him allies, calm riots, and charm enemies. The training of a young Roman noble was not confined to the mind. Physical discipline was equally important. Caesar trained in wrestling, horse riding, swimming, and the handling of weapons. But unlike many young aristocrats who treated this as a ritual, Caesar approached it with real commitment. His tutors noted his endurance, his willingness to push himself beyond what was expected. Though slender in youth, he developed a wiry strength and a resistance to fatigue that would serve him well on campaign. One of the defining traits of the young Caesar was his unshakable self-belief. It was not arrogance, at least not yet, but a conviction that he was meant for something greater. Whether this came from his family's insistence on their divine ancestry or from his own observations of Rome's power, it gave him a confidence that made others take notice. Even among his peers, he carried himself like a leader. The late Republic was a dangerous place for such ambition. Political life was a battlefield without shields, and survival often depended on aligning with the right allies at the right time. Caesar's close connection to Marius and the Populares would soon put him in direct conflict with Sulla, a man whose ruthlessness would test the young patrician's resolve. For now, though, Caesar was still a student, absorbing lessons from every corner of Rome: the grandeur of the Senate debates, the chaos of the marketplace, the military triumphs paraded through the streets, and the whispered conspiracies that traveled faster than the Tiber's current. Every moment was a preparation for the future. Rome was changing, and so was Caesar. The boy who walked through the forum with wide eyes was already learning how to read the expressions of senators, how to gauge the mood of the crowd, and how to spot opportunity in the smallest turn of events. In time, these instincts would make him one of the most formidable figures the Republic had ever known. But before he could rise, he would have to survive, and the storm clouds of Sulla's vengeance were already gathering on the horizon. By the time Gaius Julius Caesar was in his late teens, the political storms of Rome had grown into a full-blown hurricane. The uneasy balance between the Senate's optimates and the populares had shattered, and the city was being torn apart by civil war. Caesar's own family was entangled in the chaos, and soon his life would hang by a thread. The conflict centered on two titans of Roman politics: His uncle by marriage, Gaius Marius, champion of the Populars and hero of Rome's wars against the Germanic tribes, and Lucius Cornelius Sylla, an ambitious general and staunch defender of the Optimates. Their rivalry had already pushed Rome into political bloodshed once, but when Sylla returned from the east in 83 BCE, fresh from defeating Mithridates of Pontus, he was determined to take complete control of the Republic. Caesar, barely out of boyhood, had no illusions about Sulla's character. The man was brilliant, but his ambition was matched only by his ruthlessness. Sulla believed that the Senate's authority must be absolute, and anyone who threatened that authority was an enemy to be destroyed. Unfortunately for Caesar, his family connections placed him squarely in the enemy camp. The most dangerous link was not Marius himself, who was already dead, but Caesar's marriage. At 17, Caesar had wed Cornelia, the daughter of Lucius Cornelius Cinna, one of Marius's closest allies and a former consul who had ruled Rome after Marius's death. It was a good political match for a young patrician aligned with the Populares, but when Sulla seized power and declared himself dictator, it became a deadly liability. Sulla began purging his enemies in a campaign of terror known as the proscriptions. Names of his political opponents were posted publicly. Anyone listed could be killed without trial and their property seized. Some were hunted down by assassins in broad daylight. Others fled into exile. The streets of Rome ran red as old grudges were settled under the cover of political necessity. Caesar's name was not initially on the list, but Sulla sent word that if the young man wished to remain alive, he must divorce Cornelia. This was not merely a personal demand, it was a test of loyalty. By abandoning his wife, Caesar would renounce his ties to the Populares and show submission to the new regime. For most young men in his position, the choice would have been clear: survival over sentiment. But Caesar refused. Whether it was love for Cornelia, pride in his family's honor, or a stubborn unwillingness to bend to Sulla's will, his answer was the same: no. This defiance astonished even his friends. Sulla was not a man accustomed to hearing the word no, and he responded with predictable fury. Caesar was stripped of his inheritance, his priesthood as Flamen Dialis was revoked, and a death warrant was issued. Soldiers were sent to arrest him. Thus began the first of Caesar's many escapes from death. He fled Rome under cover of night, moving from one safe house to another, aided by loyal friends and relatives who risked their own lives to hide him. He shaved off his hair, changed his clothing, and disguised himself as a commoner to avoid recognition. Even so, Sulla's men nearly caught him more than once. At one point he was captured, and only secured his release by bribing the soldiers with every coin he had left. Caesar's flight took him far from the capital, into the countryside, over rough roads, and eventually beyond the reach of Sulla's patrols. But his situation was still precarious. He had no official position, no fortune, and a dictator's wrath following close behind. For a young man of noble birth, this was as close to ruin as one could come without a sword in the back. And yet, salvation came from an unexpected source: influential friends in the Senate, some of whom admired Caesar's defiance, even if they disagreed with his politics. They interceded with Sulla, arguing that the boy was too young to pose a real threat. Sulla eventually relented, though not without a warning. According to later accounts, the dictator told them, "You may save him, but know that in this young Caesar there are many Mariuses." It was both a prophecy and a curse. Sulla seemed to recognize in Caesar the same dangerous ambition that had made Marius a rival to the Senate's power. With the threat lifted, Caesar did not return immediately to Rome. The city was still under Sulla's grip, and prudence demanded distance. Instead, he left for military service in Asia Minor, where he could rebuild his career away from the dictator's watchful eyes. This episode left a deep mark on him. The young Caesar had faced Rome's most feared man and survived, not by yielding, but by standing firm. It taught him that fortune often favored boldness, that alliances were as important as armies, and that personal loyalty could be a weapon as potent as a legion. It also showed him the fragility of the Republic's laws, which could be swept aside by a single man's will. For now, Sulla's dictatorship remained unchallenged, and Caesar was a fugitive turned soldier, but he carried with him the memory of that narrow escape and the unspoken promise that one day he would return to Rome on his own terms. When the dust of Sulla's wrath finally settled, Caesar was still alive, but not by much. His inheritance was gone, his political prospects in Rome were ruined, and returning to the capital while the dictator still held power would have been a gamble with death as the wager. The path forward lay far from the city, in the distant provinces where a man could earn glory and rebuild his fortune through military service. In 81 BCE, Caesar sailed east to join the forces of Marcus Minucius Thermus, the governor of the province of Asia. Officially, he went as a military tribune, a junior officer's post suitable for a young man of patrician birth. Unofficially, he went as a man in self-imposed exile, seeking both protection from Sulla's reach and an opportunity to prove himself. Asia Minor was a land of opportunity for an ambitious Roman. Though the province had been under Rome's control for decades, it was still a volatile frontier. Rebellious cities and opportunistic pirates tested Roman authority, and the wealthy kingdom of Pontus, under King Mithridates VI, remained a constant threat. Caesar's first taste of combat came in the siege of Mytilene, a city on the island of Lesbos that had revolted against Rome. It was here that Caesar showed a blend of daring and resourcefulness that impressed even hardened veterans. While details are scarce, sources suggest he played a role in critical assaults on the city's defenses, demonstrating both courage under fire and a keen eye for strategy. His conduct earned him the Corona Civica, the civic crown, Rome's second highest military honor, awarded to those who saved the life of a fellow citizen in battle. The crown was made of oak leaves, but in Roman society it carried far more weight than gold. It granted the wearer the right to sit in the Senate without being summoned, and whenever Caesar entered the forum wearing it, all present were required to rise in respect. The honor was not just a decoration, it was a political calling card. Even in distant Asia, news of the award reached Rome, and those who had written him off as a reckless youth began to see him in a different light. After the campaign in Mytilene, Caesar was assigned to serve under Publius Servilius Esoricus in Cilicia, where Roman forces were engaged in suppressing piracy along the southern coast of Asia Minor. Pirates were no mere nuisance. They disrupted trade, kidnapped Roman citizens, and at times threatened to cut off the grain supply to the capital itself. The work was dangerous but offered steady opportunities for advancement. But it was an event on the high seas that would truly test Caesar's nerve. While traveling to Rhodes in 75 BCE to study oratory under the famed teacher Apollonius Molon, Caesar's ship was intercepted by Cilician pirates. These were not ragged bandits but organized, well-armed crews who knew the sea better than any Roman. They took him prisoner, expecting a ransom. The pirates, according to later accounts, demanded 20 talents of silver for his release, a considerable sum. Caesar laughed in their faces and insisted they ask for 50. Whether this was bravado, negotiation strategy, or sheer arrogance, it worked. The pirates took him more seriously, and his friends were dispatched to raise the money. During his captivity, Caesar behaved less like a prisoner and more like a commander temporarily inconvenienced. He joined in the pirates' games, recited poetry to them, and even ordered them to be quiet when he was sleeping. To their amusement, he repeatedly told them that once he was free, he would hunt them down and crucify them. They laughed. He did not. When the ransom was paid and Caesar was released, he immediately gathered a small fleet from the ports of Asia Minor, tracked down the pirates, and captured them. True to his word, he had them crucified, though in a gesture of what he called mercy, he ordered their throats cut first to spare them prolonged suffering. The incident cemented Caesar's reputation as a man who could not be intimidated, and whose promises, whether of friendship or vengeance, were to be taken seriously. By the time Sulla died in 78 BCE, Caesar had transformed himself from a hunted youth into a decorated soldier and a man of independent means. The years in the East had hardened him, broadened his understanding of the world, and given him the confidence of a commander. He had faced enemies in battle, stared down death at sea, and emerged not just alive, but admired. The call of Rome was growing stronger. With Sulla gone, the dangers that had driven him into exile were gone too. But the republic he would return to was not the same as the one he had left, and neither was he. The Aegean Sea in the mid-1st century BCE was as much a hunting ground as it was a trade route. While Roman power stretched across the Mediterranean, it had not yet tamed the Cilician pirates, hardened seafarers who prowled the waters in swift, shallow-draft ships, striking without warning and vanishing into hidden coves. It was into this dangerous world that Gaius Julius Caesar ventured in 75 BCE. At the time, he was not yet the towering political figure he would become, but a young noble in his mid-20s, traveling to Rhodes to study oratory under the great teacher Apollonius Molon. The trip was meant to refine his rhetorical skill, for in Rome, eloquence was the sword of the politician, but the sea had other plans. Somewhere between the coast of Asia Minor and the island of Rhodes, Caesar's vessel was intercepted by a fleet of pirate ships. The attack was swift and precise. Grappling hooks were thrown, sailors overpowered, and Caesar, along with his small entourage, was taken aboard the pirates' flagship. The pirates, assessing their prize, decided to demand 20 talents of silver for his release, a fortune in itself. But Caesar laughed in their faces. "You do not know whom you have taken," he told them, with the audacity of a man who seemed utterly unafraid of his captors. "I will give you 50 talents. This was no empty boast. By offering more than they had asked, Caesar signaled that he was a man of means and influence, someone worth keeping alive. His companions were dispatched to raise the ransom, leaving Caesar in the pirates' custody. For the next 38 days, Caesar lived among his captors in a way that baffled and amused them. He refused to behave like a prisoner. When he wished to sleep, he ordered them to be silent, and they obeyed. He joined in their games, told them stories, and even composed poetry and speeches, which he forced them to listen to under threat of punishment if they were not sufficiently impressed. When they laughed or jeered, he would mock their ignorance of literature. Most strikingly, he told them repeatedly, and without a trace of humor, that when he was free, he would return to capture them and have them crucified. They roared with laughter at what they thought was an idle threat from an arrogant young Roman. The ransom eventually arrived, paid by Caesar's loyal associates. The pirates released him at the agreed upon port, likely assuming their peculiar guest would sail on to Rhodes and forget them. They were gravely mistaken. Caesar did not continue his journey. Instead, he traveled to the port city of Miletus, where he quickly gathered a small fleet with the help of local authorities. His movements were swift, in part because he knew exactly where the pirates' base was. In a matter of days, he returned to the seas, tracked them to their anchorage, and launched a surprise attack. The pirates, caught unprepared, were overwhelmed. Many surrendered without a fight. Others were dragged from their ships. Caesar confiscated their treasure, seized their ships, and took them back to the coastal cities under Roman control. When the provincial governor hesitated to execute them, preferring to sell them as slaves for profit, Caesar took matters into his own hands. He ordered every pirate crucified, fulfilling the promise he had made in captivity. And yet, even here, he tempered vengeance with a measure of mercy. Before their crucifixion, he had their throats cut, sparing them the agony of slow death on the cross. The episode became a defining moment in the young Caesar's reputation. To the people of the eastern provinces, it showed him as a man of swift justice, unwilling to let even the most dangerous criminals escape their fate. To those in Rome who heard the tale, it confirmed that Caesar was fearless, decisive, and utterly unwilling to suffer an insult without retribution. By the time he resumed his journey to Rhodes, Caesar was no longer merely a student bound for the classroom. He was a man who had stared down armed kidnappers, bent them to his will, and hunted them to their destruction. It was an early glimpse of the relentless determination that would one day carry him from the backwaters of the Aegean to the seat of power in Rome itself. In 58 BCE, the Rhine and the Alps marked the frontier of Roman dominion. Beyond them lay the mysterious lands of Gaul, a patchwork of Celtic tribes, each with their own chieftains, rivalries, and ambitions. For the Roman Senate, Gaul was both a buffer and a threat. For Julius Caesar, freshly appointed proconsul of Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum, it was a stage, vast, untamed, and ripe for conquest. Opportunity came swiftly. The Helvetii, a tribe from the Swiss plateau, decided to abandon their mountainous homeland and migrate westward toward the Atlantic. Their movement, a great migration of tens of thousands, with wagons, livestock, and warriors, threatened to sweep across Roman allied territories in southern Gaul. The Roman Senate, concerned about the security of the province of Transalpine Gaul, officially tasked Caesar with halting their advance. Unofficially, they gave him a chance to make his mark. The Helvetii sent envoys, politely requesting safe passage through Roman lands. Caesar, master of delay and manipulation, feigned consideration. He claimed he needed time to consult the Senate and prepare supplies. In reality, he was calling up legions from their winter quarters and fortifying the Rhone crossing at Geneva. By the time the Helvetii were ready to move, they found the Roman defenses bristling, bridges destroyed, and legionaries entrenched behind walls and ditches. Caesar refused their passage outright. Blocked, the Helvetii turned north, seeking a longer route. Caesar pursued them relentlessly, moving his legions with speed that stunned both allies and enemies. His campaign was not merely a military endeavor. It was a masterclass in logistics. Supply lines stretched over mountains, scouts rode ahead to track enemy movements, and messages were dispatched to Gallic tribes to sway them to Rome's side. Some, fearing the Helvetii, agreed. Others waited to see who would emerge victorious. The clash came at the Battle of Bibracte. On a rolling plain, Roman discipline met the Helveti's fierce courage. The Gauls charged in waves, shields locked and swords flashing, but the Roman legions, drilled to perfection, held their ground. The pila, heavy Roman javelins, bent upon impact, sticking in shields and forcing the enemy to discard them. Then came the push of the short sword, the gladius, in brutal, efficient strikes. The Helvetii were driven back, their migration halted. Those who survived were ordered to return to their lands, ensuring they would no longer pose a threat. This victory was Caesar's first great triumph in Gaul. It was more than a military success. It was a political one. Rome saw him as the savior of the provinces. His soldiers saw him as a commander who shared their hardships, marching with them through mud, crossing icy rivers, and sleeping under the same stars. His enemies, both in Gaul and in Rome, saw something else, an ambitious man building an army's loyalty, his eyes fixed on glory beyond provincial boundaries. But the Helvetii were only the beginning. The defeat of one tribe sent ripples through Gaul. Some chieftains swore fealty to Rome, hoping for protection. Others, like the Germanic warlord Ariovistus, saw Roman involvement as an encroachment on their own power. The Gallic Wars had begun, and Caesar intended not merely to defend Roman territory, but to bring all of Gaul under the banner of the Republic. And in the Senate chambers back in Rome, whispers grew louder. Was Caesar securing Rome's safety, or laying the foundations for his own rise to supreme power? The chill of January 49 BCE was biting as Gaius Julius Caesar stood on the southern bank of the Rubicon River, gazing across the narrow stream that marked the official boundary between his province and the city of Rome itself. Behind him marched the 13th Legion, a seasoned force loyal not just to the Republic, but to Caesar personally. Men who had marched with him through the frozen snows of Gaul, who had endured countless battles and shared his ambitions for glory. The die was cast. For years, Caesar had walked a delicate tightrope between cooperation and rivalry with Rome's other great powers. The first triumvirate, an uneasy alliance forged between himself, Pompey the Great, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, had unraveled. Crassus was dead, killed in a disastrous campaign against Parthia, and the political bond that once united the three men had snapped. Pompey, once Caesar's ally and brother-in-law, had aligned himself with the Senate's conservative faction, the Optimates, who feared Caesar's growing power and popularity. The Senate, dominated by Pompey and his allies, had demanded Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, where he would stand trial for alleged abuses of power during his command in Gaul. To Caesar, such demands were an existential threat. Without the protection of his loyal legions, he risked imprisonment, exile, or assassination. The choice was stark: surrender his military command and political future, or defy the Senate and march on Rome. Crossing the Rubicon was no impulsive act. It was a moment charged with symbolism and consequence. The river itself was sacred, a boundary no general was legally allowed to cross with armed troops under penalty of death. To do so was an act of war against the Republic. Caesar's whispered phrase, "Alia acta est," the die is cast, captured the irrevocable nature of his decision. There was no turning back. As his legions stepped into the cold, murky waters, a shockwave rippled through Rome's political and social order. The city itself seemed paralyzed with fear. Senators scrambled to pack their belongings, carrying with them the treasury and Rome's sacred religious relics. Pompey and many aristocrats fled south, intending to regroup their forces in southern Italy and eventually escape to Greece, where they could rally additional legions and reinforcements from Rome's eastern provinces. Despite the looming threat of civil war, Caesar moved with remarkable speed and precision. His march through Italy was characterized by a mix of military prowess and political savvy. Cities and towns along his route, instead of resisting, opened their gates, some out of fear, others persuaded by his reputation for clemency and order. Caesar's strategy was masterful. Avoid unnecessary bloodshed in Italy's heartland, present himself as the savior of the Republic rather than its enemy, and isolate Pompey politically by winning over the Roman people and provincial leaders. His soldiers marched in disciplined columns, their morale high, buoyed by confidence in their commander's vision and leadership. Letters and speeches circulated, crafted by Caesar and his allies, to present his cause as just and necessary. He portrayed the Senate's demands as illegal attempts to undermine his dignity and strip him of his rights as a Roman magistrate. Public opinion was a battlefield as important as the physical one. Pompey, for his part, was no less determined. With the Senate's blessing, he assumed command of the Republican forces, gathering legions and resources across the peninsula. His allies controlled the wealthy provinces of the east, and he had access to considerable naval power. Pompey's plan was to avoid direct confrontation with Caesar until he could consolidate his forces and strike with overwhelming strength. The stage was set for a brutal and complex civil war. It would not simply be a clash of armies but a profound conflict over the future of Rome itself. Would the Republic's centuries-old institutions survive, or would one man's ambition reshape the destiny of the Mediterranean world? Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon was the opening salvo. The subsequent campaign saw battles, sieges, and shifting allegiances. Towns loyal to Pompey resisted, while others switched sides. Senators debated, some caught between fear and hope. The fabric of Roman society stretched and strained under the weight of civil conflict. Throughout it all, Caesar maintained his characteristic blend of boldness and pragmatism. He issued proclamations promising clemency to defeated foes, used political propaganda to undermine Pompey's support, and secured key cities with minimal violence. Yet when battles were inevitable, his tactical genius shone. His legions, battle-hardened and fiercely loyal, delivered crushing defeats to Pompey's forces. The civil war was not confined to Italy. It spanned the Mediterranean, involving naval engagements, the control of provinces, and diplomatic maneuvering with Rome's allies and enemies alike. Caesar's control of the western provinces allowed him access to resources and manpower, while Pompey's eastern strongholds presented formidable challenges. As the war unfolded, Caesar's image transformed. To his supporters, he was the champion of reform and justice, the man willing to break with corrupt traditions to restore Rome's greatness. To his enemies, he was a tyrant and usurper, the destroyer of the Republic. The personal stakes were enormous. Caesar's life, honor, and legacy depended on the outcome. Failure meant death or exile. Victory promised unmatched power and possibly kingship, an idea that many Romans still found deeply troubling. By the time Caesar advanced toward Rome's heart, The Republic was fractured beyond repair. The Civil War was no longer merely a political struggle. It had become a saga of destiny, power, and the making of an empire. After Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, a bold and irrevocable act that shattered the fragile peace of the Roman Republic, the wheels of civil war turned swiftly and decisively. Yet while the act itself was momentous, it was what followed, the series of campaigns, battles, political maneuvers, and betrayals that truly shaped the course of history. The initial phase of the war saw Caesar rapidly secure much of Italy with minimal bloodshed. His careful strategy combined military skill with political acumen. He offered clemency to towns that surrendered, underscored his respect for Roman traditions, and positioned himself as the protector of the Republic, even as he marched on the Senate's strongholds. The swift advance forced Pompey and the conservative senatorial faction to abandon Rome, retreating south to regroup. Pompey's retreat was tactical, not cowardly. He knew Caesar's forces were battle-hardened veterans, loyal to their commander, and his own forces were a patchwork of troops scattered across the Mediterranean. Pompey sought to consolidate his strength in the eastern provinces, particularly Greece, where he commanded significant resources, loyal legions, and the support of wealthy allies. As Caesar's forces crossed the Adriatic Sea and landed in Epirus in 48 BCE, the stage was set for a monumental confrontation. The two commanders, Caesar, the cunning and charismatic general, and Pompey, the experienced and traditionally respected leader, were poised to clash for Rome's future. The gathering of forces on the plains near Pharsalus in central Greece was one of the greatest military encounters of the ancient world. Pompey commanded a larger army, estimated at around 45,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry, against Caesar's approximately 22,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. But numbers alone did not guarantee victory. Caesar's legions were disciplined, battle-tested, and fiercely loyal. His men trusted his leadership implicitly. Many had fought with him for years in Gaul and believed in his vision. In contrast, Pompey's army included many recruits and soldiers less committed to the cause, some even reluctant to fight against their fellow Romans. The battle began with a cavalry engagement. Pompey's cavalry initially overwhelmed Caesar's smaller mounted force, threatening to outflank his infantry lines. Yet Caesar had anticipated this and hidden a reserve force of 6 cohorts behind his right wing, commanded by Titus Labienus. As Pompey's cavalry pressed forward, these hidden troops surged out, routing the attackers and turning the tide. With the cavalry repelled, Caesar launched a fierce assault against Pompey's infantry. The legions pushed forward with relentless pressure, their shields interlocked, the sharp points of their pila driving back the enemy. Pompey's forces, though larger, began to falter under the coordinated Roman discipline and tactical brilliance. As chaos rippled through Pompey's ranks, Caesar's forces capitalized, breaking their enemies' lines and sowing panic. Pompey's troops fled the battlefield in disorder, their morale shattered by the unexpected ferocity and precision of Caesar's attack. Pompey himself fled the field, choosing survival over command. He retreated to the southern coast, intent on regrouping his forces and securing naval passage to Egypt, where he hoped to find allies in the Ptolemaic court. The Battle of Pharsalus was a turning point. It was not just a military victory, it was a decisive psychological blow that broke Pompey's aura of invincibility. Rome's old guard had been humbled by the man who was once their political equal. Yet Pompey's fate took a tragic and brutal turn in Egypt. Arriving at the harbor of Alexandria, he sought refuge from his former rival, but the Egyptian court was torn by its own power struggles. Ptolemy XIII, the young pharaoh, was locked in conflict with his sister Cleopatra over control of the throne. Ptolemy's advisors, eager to win Caesar's favor and rid themselves of a dangerous guest, made a cold political calculation. They ordered Pompey's assassination. As he disembarked, the former great general was stabbed to death, his head severed and presented as a grisly offering to Caesar. Caesar's reaction was complex and marked by political prudence and personal respect. Though he mourned the loss of his former ally and rival, he understood the brutal realities of power. He gave Pompey a state funeral, showing respect to the memory of Rome's once mighty commander, while consolidating his own position in Egypt. But Egypt itself was now a new arena of conflict. Caesar found himself embroiled in the dynastic struggle between Ptolemy and Cleopatra, a drama of power, passion, and alliance that would have consequences far beyond the Nile. Meanwhile, back in Rome and the wider Mediterranean, Caesar's grip tightened. His victory at Pharsalus allowed him to march into the city with growing support. His political enemies were scattered or defeated, his popularity among the Roman people soared, and his legions were loyal beyond question. Yet his consolidation of power was met with unease. The Republic, which had stood for centuries as a symbol of collective governance and shared power, seemed to be slipping away into the hands of one man. The Senate, once the heart of Roman political life, was marginalized. Caesar's appointment as dictator, initially temporary, marked a shift toward autocracy. His reforms, while popular with many, unsettled the aristocracy, who feared the loss of their privileges and the rise of tyranny. Civil war had ravaged the Republic, but it had not yet fully resolved the question of Rome's future. Caesar's victories had brought him near to absolute power, but that power came with growing resistance and danger. The tides of war, betrayal, and political intrigue continued to surge. The fate of Rome and of Caesar himself would be decided not only by the sword, but by the delicate balance of loyalty, ambition, and the enduring legacy of a republic on the brink of transformation. The city of Rome had never witnessed a figure quite like Gaius Julius Caesar, emerging from years of brutal civil war as the unrivaled master of the Roman world. Caesar now stood at the apex of power. Yet this unprecedented authority, while dazzling, was also precarious. What followed was a turbulent time marked by sweeping reforms, political tension, and ultimately a betrayal that would echo through history. After his triumph over Pompey and the consolidation of his rule, Caesar wasted no time in reshaping Rome's institutions. In 46 BCE, the Senate granted him a 10-year dictatorship, but this was soon extended to dictatorship for life. These positions, far beyond the temporary emergency role of earlier dictators, gave him near absolute control over legislation, administration, and military command. With this power, Caesar embarked on an ambitious program of reform. He passed laws to alleviate crippling debts, redistributed land to veterans and the urban poor, and reorganized grain supplies to prevent famine in the city. Perhaps most famously, he reformed the chaotic Roman calendar, introducing the Julian calendar, a solar system more accurate and lasting, whose legacy endures to this day. Caesar also expanded the Senate's membership to over 900, including men from Rome's far-flung provinces. While this move brought new voices into the government, it diluted the influence of the old aristocratic families, sowing resentment among the elite. His public image grew ever more dominant. Statues were erected in his likeness, coins minted bearing his visage, and honors such as the laurel wreath, traditionally a symbol of military triumph, became a constant part of his public persona. The Senate even bestowed upon him the title Pater Patria, Father of the Fatherland, cementing his symbolic role as the embodiment of Rome itself. Yet for many senators and aristocrats, these honors were chilling. To them, Caesar appeared less a leader of a republic and more a monarch in all but name, the specter of kingship, long anathema to Roman ideals since the overthrow of the monarchy centuries earlier, loomed large. Among the growing opposition were men once loyal to Caesar. Marcus Junius Brutus, a man guided by Stoic philosophy and a love for the Republic, and Gaius Cassius Longinus, a skilled general and senator. Both had been allies, but now feared Caesar's rule was an existential threat to Rome's liberty. Rumors spread that Caesar planned to crown himself king. His public celebrations, the statues, the honors, they all seemed to suggest a shift from republican leader to monarch. This perception stoked anxiety and hatred among the traditional elite, many of whom viewed their own privileges slipping away. As fears deepened, a conspiracy took shape in secret. Senators, patricians, and others, disillusioned with Caesar's rule, began plotting to end his life. The conspirators swore oaths in shadowed chambers, convinced that assassination was the only means to restore the Republic's freedoms and prevent tyranny. Despite multiple warnings, omens, soothsayers, even direct messages urging caution, Caesar's fate was sealed on the Ides of March 15th, 44 BCE. On that day he attended a Senate session at the Theater of Pompey, a grand hall built by his old rival, surrounded by nearly 60 conspirators, including Brutus and Cassius. Caesar was suddenly attacked. The first dagger plunged into his shoulder, and despite attempts to defend himself, he was overwhelmed, receiving 23 stab wounds. As the blows rained down, Caesar's reported last words, "E tu, Brute, you too, Brutus," expressed the profound shock and betrayal he felt, seeing one he trusted among the attackers. Though the exact phrase is debated, it captures the tragic depth of the event. The assassination, intended to save the Republic, instead plunged Rome into deeper chaos. Far from restoring order, it ignited a series of civil wars. Caesar's loyal followers, Mark Antony, a passionate and cunning ally, and Octavian, his adopted heir and great-nephew, rose in his defense, rallying forces to avenge his death and secure his legacy. Rome was gripped by turmoil. Public opinion was divided. Some hailed the assassins as defenders of liberty. Others mourned Caesar as the Republic's fallen savior. At Caesar's funeral, Mark Antony's powerful oration turned the tide, stirring outrage against the conspirators and inciting the Roman people to rebellion. The political vacuum left by Caesar's death unleashed a brutal power struggle that would last for years. Ultimately, it would lead to the rise of Octavian and the transformation of Rome from a fragile republic into a stable empire. Caesar's dictatorship and death marked both an end and a beginning, the final chapter of the Republic's long story and the opening act of Imperial Rome's rise. The murder of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March, 44 BCE, was meant to save the Roman Republic from tyranny, but instead it unleashed chaos and turmoil unlike anything the city had ever seen. Rome, already weakened by decades of political strife and civil war, now found itself fractured between competing factions, each claiming the mantle of Caesar's legacy or the defense of the Republic. What followed was a tempest of shifting alliances, battles, political maneuvering, and tragedy that would ultimately end the Republic and usher in the Roman Empire. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal friend and trusted general, quickly seized control of the capital and the loyalty of Caesar's legions. His stirring funeral oration for Caesar famously incited the Roman masses, turning public grief into fury against the conspirators. The streets of Rome erupted in violence. The Senate was forced to flee, and the assassins, including Brutus and Cassius, found themselves isolated and hunted. Antony's swift consolidation of power revealed his political acumen and deep understanding of Rome's volatile mood. Into this volatile scene stepped Octavian, Caesar's great nephew and adopted son, barely 18 years old and inexperienced in politics or warfare. Octavian nevertheless claimed his inheritance with a resolute will. Supported by Caesar's veterans and allies, he quickly gathered resources and forged crucial alliances. His youth belied a calculating mind and an ambition that rivaled even Caesar's. The Senate, struggling to regain control amidst the chaos, attempted to navigate between Antony, Octavian, and the assassins, but the balance of power tipped as Antony and Octavian, despite personal rivalries, joined forces with Marcus Aemilius Lepidus to form the Second Triumvirate in 43 BCE. This alliance was a political and military pact designed to defeat the conspirators and secure control of Rome's vast territories. The Triumvirate unleashed a reign of terror in the form of proscriptions, lists of enemies condemned to death or exile. Wealthy senators, former allies, and anyone perceived as a threat were eliminated or forced to flee. This brutal purge consolidated the triumvirate's power, but deepened divisions and resentments. The eastern provinces became the battleground for the ultimate confrontation. Brutus and Cassius, commanding forces loyal to the Republic, gathered an army to confront Antony and Octavian. In 42 BCE, their armies met at the twin battles of Philippi and Macedonia. The conflict was fierce and decisive. Antony's forces defeated Brutus's troops, while Octavian overcame Cassius's men. Faced with defeat, both Cassius and Brutus chose suicide over capture, their deaths marking the effective end of the Republican resistance. Yet the victory also exposed cracks within the triumvirate itself. Lepidus was soon sidelined, his power diminished, leaving Antony and Octavian as the two dominant figures in Rome. In the following years, tension between Antony and Octavian grew. Antony's alliance with Cleopatra, the charismatic and politically astute Queen of Egypt, alarmed many Romans. Their romantic and political partnership was seen as a threat to Roman traditions and sovereignty. Octavian used this fear to portray Antony as a traitor who placed foreign interests above Rome. The stage was set for a final showdown. In 31 BCE, the two sides clashed in the naval battle of Actium off the coast of Greece. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his skilled general Agrippa, decisively defeated Antony and Cleopatra's forces. The defeat forced the couple to flee to Egypt. Their final days were marked by despair and defeat. As Octavian's forces closed in, Cleopatra and Antony chose death over captivity, ending their lives in 30 BCE. Their deaths symbolize the collapse of the old order and the final victory of Octavian. Returning to Rome, Octavian was hailed as the city's savior and undisputed ruler. Yet, aware of Roman aversion to monarchy and dictatorship, he shrewdly avoided the title of king or dictator. In 27 BCE, he was granted the honorific title Augustus by the Senate, marking the birth of the Roman Empire and the Principate, the new form of government that combined autocratic rule with republican appearances. Augustus carefully balanced power with tradition. He maintained the Senate and other republican institutions, but controlled the military, the treasury, and foreign policy. His reign ushered in a period of relative peace known as the Pax Romana, which lasted for centuries. Thus, from the ashes of Caesar's assassination rose a new era. The Republic, with its fragile and fractious system, gave way to imperial Rome under Augustus, an empire that would shape the political, cultural, and social foundations of the Western world for millennia to come. With the dust of civil war finally settling, Rome stood on the precipice of a new era. The republic that had ruled for centuries lay in ruins, weakened by internecine conflict and political decay. Into this vacuum stepped Augustus, a man of remarkable political savvy and vision, determined to restore order and secure his place as Rome's undisputed leader. Yet Augustus understood the fragile nature of Roman sensibilities. The very word king was poison, a reminder of a despised past. To wield power effectively, he needed a new approach, one that combined the trappings of the old republic with the reality of centralized authority. Augustus adopted the title princeps, meaning first citizen, a deliberate and subtle assertion that he was merely the foremost among equals rather than a monarch. This was the foundation of the Principate, a system that preserved republican institutions like the Senate, magistracies, and assemblies, but in which real power rested firmly in the hands of the emperor. By presenting himself as the protector and restorer of tradition, Augustus won the cooperation of Rome's aristocracy, who retained prestige but ceded political control. Central to Augustus's strategy was the restoration and reform of Rome's political institutions. He reconstituted the Senate, expanding its membership and filling it with men loyal to him, while carefully sidelining those who posed threats. Senators were granted privileges and responsibilities, but their influence was tightly controlled. Augustus maintained the facade of republican debate and decision-making, even as he ensured outcomes favored his policies. This delicate balance of power allowed him to rule with authority while avoiding the appearance of tyranny. The military was another pillar of Augustus's new order. He professionalized the legions, creating a standing army of about 28 legions, loyal not to individual generals, but to the emperor himself. Soldiers were paid regular salaries and granted pensions and land upon retirement, fostering long-term loyalty. Augustus also established the Praetorian Guard, an elite force tasked with protecting the emperor and serving as a political instrument within Rome. These reforms prevented the kind of military uprisings and personal ambitions that had fueled the previous century's civil wars. Augustus extended his reforms beyond politics and the military to Rome's vast and diverse provinces. He reorganized provincial administration, placing many territories under direct imperial control, while granting limited autonomy to others. Governors were appointed carefully, accountable to Augustus and his administration, ensuring tighter integration of the empire. This system facilitated efficient tax collection, legal order, and military security across thousands of miles of territory, from the windswept frontiers of Germania to the sun-drenched cities of Egypt. The transformation of Rome's urban landscape was both practical and symbolic. Augustus famously boasted that he had found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble. Under his patronage, the city saw an unprecedented building boom. Temples dedicated to Roman gods were restored or newly constructed. Magnificent forums, basilicas, and aqueducts reshaped the capital, and roads extended imperial reach into far corners of the empire. These projects were not merely architectural feats, but powerful propaganda tools, reinforcing the message of renewal, divine favor, and Augustus's role as Rome's great benefactor. Culturally, Augustus understood the power of art and literature in shaping public opinion and legacy. His reign witnessed a flourishing of Latin literature, with poets like Virgil composing the Aeneid, an epic linking Rome's origins to the heroic legacy of Troy and endorsing Augustus's leadership as the fulfillment of destiny. Horace's odes and Ovid's elegies celebrated Roman virtues and the new peace. This cultural renaissance, supported by imperial patronage, crafted a narrative of Augustus as the bringer of a golden age, a period of peace, prosperity, and moral revival. Yet Augustus's reign was not without challenges. He navigated complex relationships with the Senate and aristocracy, carefully managing rival ambitions and occasional conspiracies. Though his power was supreme, Augustus was a master of subtlety and restraint, using patronage, diplomacy, and symbolism rather than open force to maintain control. His reign was marked by relative stability, but the potential for unrest lingered beneath the surface. The Pax Romana, or Roman peace, which Augustus inaugurated, would last for over 2 centuries. During this time, the empire's borders expanded to their greatest extent, trade flourished across the Mediterranean and beyond, and Roman law and culture spread widely. Roads connected distant provinces, facilitating military movement, commerce, and communication, while cities across the empire adopted Roman urban planning and institutions. Augustus's legacy was transformative. By reconciling autocratic power with republican tradition, he created a political system that endured long after his death. His reign marked the end of the Roman Republic's turbulent experiment and the dawn of the Roman Empire, whose influence shaped the development of Western civilization. With Augustus firmly established as Rome's first emperor, the Republic's centuries-old institutions transformed gradually into a new system that would endure for centuries. This transition was neither abrupt nor marked by sweeping revolution, but by subtle, skillful change, carefully guided by Augustus himself. His reign laid the foundations of what would become the Roman Empire, a vast, interconnected political and cultural entity stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. The period following Augustus's rise was known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, a remarkable era lasting over 200 years, during which the empire experienced relative internal stability, flourishing trade, and cultural prosperity. This peace was fragile and required constant attention. It was not merely the absence of civil war, but a carefully maintained balance of military strength, political control, and social cohesion. At the heart of Augustus's success was his administrative genius. He reorganized the empire into provinces, each governed either by senators or imperial officials, depending on their importance and strategic position. Provinces closer to Rome or less militarized were generally under senatorial control, while frontier regions or those requiring military oversight were administered directly by the emperor's appointees. This dual system ensured local governance while maintaining imperial authority, preventing the rise of regional warlords who could challenge the central government. Roman law became a powerful unifying force. Codified and disseminated throughout the empire, it established standards of justice, property rights, and civic duties. This legal framework, grounded in centuries of Roman tradition, helped bind together a diverse population comprising Greeks, Gauls, Egyptians, Jews, and many other peoples. By applying a common system of law, Rome fostered a sense of shared identity and fairness, even amid cultural diversity. Religious and cultural integration were equally important tools of unity. Augustus skillfully promoted the imperial cult, where the emperor and his family were revered as divine or semi-divine figures. Temples dedicated to the emperor sprang up in cities across the empire, blending Roman religious practices with local traditions. This fusion of politics and religion reinforced loyalty and respect for imperial authority, encouraging subjects to see the emperor not just as a ruler, but as a divine protector of peace and prosperity. Infrastructure projects under Augustus and his successors reshaped the physical and social landscape of the empire. The famed Roman roads, stretching over 250,000 miles at their peak, facilitated commerce, military logistics, and communication, knitting together distant provinces with the heart of Rome. Aqueducts brought fresh water to urban centers, supporting burgeoning populations and public health. Amphitheaters, theaters, and public baths became centers of social life, entertainment, and civic pride, spreading Roman customs and cultural values far beyond the city of Rome. Latin and Greek emerged as the empire's dominant languages, creating cultural cohesion while accommodating local dialects and languages. Latin was the administrative and legal language in the West, while Greek served as the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean. This bilingualism fostered intellectual exchange, trade, and diplomacy, enriching the cultural tapestry of the empire. Despite this era of peace and prosperity, the empire was never free from challenges. Border regions, especially along the Rhine and Danube rivers, saw frequent skirmishes and incursions by Germanic tribes and other peoples. The Roman legions stationed along these frontiers remained vigilant, projecting power and deterring invasions. Rebellions occasionally flared within the provinces, driven by local grievances, cultural differences, or ambitious leaders seeking independence. The central government responded with a mixture of military force, diplomacy, and incorporation of local elites into the imperial system. Political intrigue and succession struggles also tested the stability of the new imperial order. Augustus himself carefully crafted a succession plan, adopting his stepson Tiberius and training him to succeed. Yet, as later emperors discovered, the balance between maintaining power and avoiding the pitfalls of tyranny, court intrigue, and popular unrest was delicate and often precarious. Culturally, the Augustan age became a golden era of Roman literature, art, and philosophy. Writers such as Virgil, whose epic Aeneid glorified Rome's mythic origins and Augustus's destiny, and Horace, whose odes celebrated peace and moderation, created works that shaped Roman identity and values. Public monuments, sculptures, and coinage conveyed messages of unity, divine favor, and imperial grandeur, reinforcing the legitimacy of Augustus and his successors. Augustus's reign set enduring precedents for governance, blending autocratic power with republican forms in a way that satisfied Rome's complex traditions and ambitions. His ability to maintain control without overt displays of dictatorship allowed the empire to survive internal tensions and external threats alike. Through his leadership, Rome transitioned from a fragile republic racked by factionalism into a powerful, centralized empire that would dominate the ancient world. This transformation had far reaching consequences. The political model Augustus created influenced governance for centuries, and Rome's cultural, legal, and architectural legacies continued to shape European civilization long after the empire's decline. As Rome entered this new imperial phase, the challenges of ruling a vast and diverse population required constant adaptation and innovation. Yet under the guiding hand of Augustus, the Roman Empire achieved a remarkable balance, one that combined strength with stability, tradition with innovation, and authority with public service. This balance would define the character of imperial Rome and set the stage for its centuries of dominance. As Augustus's reign progressed, the foundations he laid began to take full shape, turning Rome from a city-state fractured by civil wars into the heart of a sprawling empire. The stability and peace brought by the Pax Romana opened new opportunities for economic growth, cultural exchange, and political consolidation, but also introduced fresh challenges that tested the resilience of Roman governance. One of Augustus's lasting achievements was the professionalization and stabilization of the Roman military. Unlike earlier armies loyal to individual generals, Augustus created a standing army whose allegiance was to the emperor and the empire itself. This reform ensured that the legions remained a unifying force, essential for both defense and internal order. Soldiers received regular pay, formal training, and retirement benefits, fostering loyalty and discipline. Additionally, Augustus stationed troops along the empire's vast frontiers, especially in volatile regions such as Germania, Britain, and the eastern borders near Parthia. Fortifications, watchtowers, and roads were built to support military logistics and rapid response to threats. The empire's expansion slowed under Augustus as he focused on consolidating and securing existing borders rather than pursuing endless conquest. This defensive strategy was wise, as overextension could threaten Rome's stability. However, military campaigns continued in Britain and along the Rhine and Danube rivers, gradually extending Roman influence. The conquest of new territories brought wealth, slaves, and resources into the empire, fueling Rome's economy and elite culture. Economic prosperity during this period was facilitated by a vast network of trade routes connecting Rome to distant lands. Goods such as silk from China, spices from India, grain from Egypt, and metals from Spain flowed into the empire, enriching its cities and citizens. The Mediterranean Sea, often called Mare Nostrum, RC, was effectively a Roman lake, protected by the imperial navy and safe for merchants. Urban centers grew, and new towns were founded, spreading Roman architecture, engineering, and culture. Culturally, the empire under Augustus became a melting pot of traditions. Latin remained the official language of administration and law in the West, while Greek continued as the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean, preserving Hellenistic culture. Local customs, religions, and artistic styles blended with Roman ideals, creating a diverse but interconnected society. The imperial court sponsored poets, historians, and philosophers who celebrated Rome's glory and the emperor's role in shaping history. Literature, theater, and visual arts flourished, fostering a shared Roman identity that transcended regional differences. Augustus's religious reforms reinforced his political authority. He revived traditional Roman religious practices, rebuilt temples, and emphasized the worship of Rome's gods alongside the imperial cult. The emperor himself was deified after his death, establishing a precedent for his successors and providing a spiritual dimension to imperial loyalty. This intertwining of religion and politics helped stabilize the empire by promoting unity and reverence for the emperor's person. However, despite these successes, the early empire faced significant challenges. The vastness of the territory made communication and control difficult, and distant provinces sometimes resisted Roman rule. Rebellions occurred sporadically, as did conflicts with external tribes and kingdoms. Managing the ambitions and rivalries of Roman elites required constant attention, and succession crises sometimes threatened stability. Augustus's chosen heir, Tiberius, inherited a stable but complex empire. Tiberius proved an able, if somewhat austere, ruler who maintained his predecessor's policies but struggled with political intrigue at court. Subsequent emperors varied widely in ability and temperament, some strengthening the empire and others contributing to its difficulties. Nevertheless, the political and administrative system Augustus created endured. The Principate balanced centralized authority with the appearance of republican governance, allowing Rome to govern a vast and diverse population effectively. This system evolved over centuries, but retained its core principles well into late antiquity. The legacy of Augustus and the early empire was profound. By transforming Rome's political structure, stabilizing its military, fostering economic prosperity, and promoting cultural unity, Augustus set the stage for the Roman Empire's centuries-long dominance. His vision shaped not only his own time, but also the future of Western civilization, influencing governance, law, culture, and architecture for millennia. As the empire moved forward, it faced new challenges and transformations, but the foundations laid in this formative period remained central to its identity and endurance. With the foundations of the Roman Empire firmly established under Augustus and his immediate successors, the empire entered a phase of expansion, consolidation, and cultural integration that would define its character for centuries. This era witnessed not only military campaigns and territorial growth, but also profound social, political, and economic transformations that shaped Roman society and governance. The empire's frontiers became a primary focus of imperial policy. While Augustus had largely shifted from aggressive conquest to consolidation, subsequent emperors pursued military campaigns to secure and extend Rome's borders. The northern frontiers along the Rhine and Danube rivers were fortified with a network of forts, watchtowers, and roads, creating a formidable barrier against Germanic tribes. In Britain, the conquest begun by Claudius in 43 CE gradually expanded Roman control south of the Scottish Highlands. These frontier zones were often volatile, requiring a constant military presence and diplomacy with local tribes. In the east, Rome faced the enduring challenge of Parthia, a powerful empire in what is now Iran and Iraq. Although direct conquest proved difficult, Rome engaged in frequent skirmishes, diplomatic negotiations, and client state politics to maintain influence over Armenia and buffer states. The East remained a complex and often unstable region where Roman and Parthian interests clashed. Within the empire, the population was remarkably diverse, encompassing a wide range of ethnicities, languages, and cultures. Roman citizenship gradually expanded to include many provincials, culminating in the Constitutio Antoniniana issued by Emperor Caracalla in 212 CE, which granted citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire. This policy fostered greater legal unity and integration, but also challenged traditional Roman identities and social hierarchies. Economically, the empire thrived on agriculture, trade, and mining. Vast estates produced grain, olives, wine, and other staples that fed the urban populations. Trade networks extended from Britain and the Atlantic coast to India and the Red Sea, connecting distant regions through complex routes. Roman roads and sea lanes facilitated commerce, enabling goods, people, and ideas to move across the empire. Cities flourished as centers of administration, culture, and commerce. Roman law continued to evolve, codifying principles of justice and governance that influenced future legal systems. The development of legal institutions and professional jurists helped administer a vast and complex society, balancing local customs with imperial regulations. Culturally, the Roman world was vibrant and cosmopolitan. Latin and Greek literature, philosophy, and art reached new heights, with poets like Ovid and historians like Tacitus chronicling the empire's achievements and challenges. Public spectacles such as gladiatorial games and theater entertained diverse audiences, reinforcing social norms and imperial ideology. Religion played a significant role in Roman life. Traditional Roman polytheism coexisted with a variety of mystery cults, Eastern religions, and the eventual rise of Christianity. The imperial cult, venerating the emperor and his family, served as a unifying force, linking religious devotion with loyalty to the state. Despite its strength, the empire faced underlying tensions, social inequality, economic disparities, and political rivalries persisted. The concentration of wealth among the elite and the reliance on slave labor created structural challenges. Military pressures from external tribes and internal usurpations tested the empire's resilience. The emperors who followed Augustus varied in effectiveness and character. Some, like Trajan and Hadrian, strengthened the empire through wise governance and monumental building projects. Others, such as Nero and Caligula, are remembered for excess and instability. The succession of emperors was often marked by intrigue, assassination, and civil war. Nevertheless, the Roman Empire during this period solidified many of the institutions, cultural patterns, and political structures that would endure into late antiquity. The integration of diverse peoples, the spread of Roman law and culture, and the maintenance of a vast interconnected realm demonstrated the empire's remarkable adaptability. As Rome continued to grow and evolve, it faced new challenges that would test its foundations. Yet the legacy of the early empire, its governance, culture, and power, remained a defining influence on the ancient world and beyond. As the Roman Empire reached its zenith in the 2nd century CE, the period often referred to as the High Empire marked a golden age of expansion, cultural flourishing, and relative peace. The emperors of this era, particularly Trajan and Hadrian, exemplified Rome's power, sophistication, and adaptability, However, beneath the surface of prosperity lay complex social, economic, and political tensions that foreshadowed the challenges the empire would face in the centuries ahead. Trajan's reign from 98 to 117 CE represented the height of Roman territorial expansion. His military genius and political acumen secured vast new provinces, including the conquest of Dacia, a region rich in gold mines that significantly boosted the empire's treasury. Trajan's campaigns extended Roman influence into Mesopotamia, pushing the empire's eastern borders to their greatest extent. This expansion brought wealth, slaves, and new resources, fueling grand construction projects in Rome and the provinces. The monumental Trajan's Column stands as a towering testament to his victories, adorned with intricate reliefs that narrate his military triumphs and Rome's imperial might. However, Trajan's conquests also stretched the empire's resources and exposed its limits. His successor, Hadrian, recognized that Rome's strength lay not merely in expansion, but in consolidation and governance. Hadrian shifted the empire's focus inward, fortifying borders, improving infrastructure, and reforming administration. His construction of Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain symbolized this defensive strategy, creating a formidable barrier to deter incursions by hostile tribes. Hadrian's extensive travels throughout the provinces demonstrated his commitment to understanding and managing the diverse peoples within the empire. He invested in urban development, legal reform, and cultural patronage, fostering a sense of unity and stability. Despite these achievements, governing an empire of such magnitude posed enormous challenges. Communication delays hampered quick decision-making, while provincial corruption and inefficiency threatened effective administration. Maintaining loyalty among local elites and integrating diverse cultures required skillful diplomacy and occasional force. The military, though professionalized and disciplined, demanded significant financial support. The legions were stationed along restless frontiers, ready to respond to barbarian incursions and revolts. Economic complexities also emerged during this period. The empire's wealth depended heavily on agriculture, mining, and trade. Vast estates, owned by aristocrats, relied on slave labor, creating a rigid social hierarchy that disadvantaged small farmers and urban poor. Inflation and currency devaluation occasionally disrupted the economy. Urban centers swelled as rural populations migrated in search of opportunity, creating pressures on housing, sanitation, and public services. Trade flourished across the Mediterranean and beyond, linking Rome to distant lands in Asia and Africa. Goods such as silk, spices, precious metals, and exotic animals moved along complex routes that spanned continents. Roman roads, ports, and the navy facilitated commerce and communication, knitting together the vast empire into an interconnected economic system. Yet this prosperity was vulnerable to piracy, banditry, and regional instability. Cultural and religious life in the empire was rich and varied. Traditional Roman polytheism remained dominant, with a pantheon of gods and state-sponsored rituals that reinforced social order. At the same time, mystery religions and Eastern cults, like those of Isis and Mithras, gained followers, offering personal salvation and secret rites that appealed to many. Christianity emerged as a growing religious movement, initially persecuted but steadily attracting converts. Its message of spiritual equality and hope resonated, especially with the disenfranchised and urban populations. Though still underground, Christianity's rise hinted at profound shifts to come in the empire's religious landscape. Politically, the emperor remained the ultimate authority, embodying the unity and power of Rome. The Senate's influence waned further, becoming largely ceremonial, while imperial bureaucracy expanded to manage the complexities of governance. Succession remained fraught with uncertainty. Emperors were often chosen by adoption or military support rather than hereditary right, leading to intrigue and occasionally violent contestation. Maintaining the delicate balance of power among the military, the aristocracy, and the populace required constant vigilance. Despite these pressures, the High Empire era witnessed remarkable cultural achievements. Roman law evolved into a sophisticated system of jurisprudence that influenced governance and justice for centuries. Literature flourished, with historians like Tacitus and poets such as Juvenal reflecting on Rome's grandeur and moral challenges. Public entertainments, gladiatorial games, theater, chariot races provided spectacle and social cohesion, while monumental architecture showcased imperial glory. As the empire moved forward, it faced growing pressures from both within and without. Social inequalities, economic difficulties, and political rivalries simmered beneath the surface. On the frontiers, new waves of barbarian tribes pressed against Roman borders, testing the empire's military might. Internally, religious transformations and cultural shifts challenged traditional Roman identity. The period of the High Empire thus stands as a complex chapter in Rome's history, a time of unparalleled achievement and underlying tension. The foundations laid by Augustus and his successors allowed Rome to maintain dominance, but the seeds of future crisis were already sown. The empire's ability to adapt and endure these challenges would determine its fate in the centuries to come. By the mid-3rd century CE, the Roman Empire faced an unprecedented set of challenges that would shake its very foundations and test its resilience like never before. What had been centuries of relative peace and prosperity now gave way to a turbulent period historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. This era was marked by political instability, economic turmoil, external invasions, and social upheaval, a time when the empire seemed on the brink of collapse. The political scene grew chaotic as emperors rose and fell with alarming speed. Between 235 and 284 CE, Rome saw more than 50 emperors claim the throne, many through violent usurpations, assassinations, or military coups. This rapid turnover, often referred to as the Barracks Emperors period, reflected the growing power of the military and politics and the fragility of imperial authority. The Senate's role had long diminished, and the loyalty of the legions became the decisive factor in imperial succession. External threats compounded internal weakness. Germanic tribes such as the Goths and Franks pressed relentlessly against the empire's northern borders, conducting raids and settlements into Roman territory. In the east, the Sassanid Empire, a revitalized Persian power, challenged Rome's control over Mesopotamia in the Near East, waging costly wars that drained resources. These invasions disrupted trade routes and destabilized border regions, forcing the empire to divert troops and attention to multiple fronts. Economic problems worsened dramatically during this period. The empire suffered from hyperinflation as emperors debased the currency to fund military campaigns and public expenses. Agricultural production declined Due to war, neglect, and population movements, trade routes became less secure, and urban centers faced shortages of food and goods. Heavy taxation and economic hardship increased social tensions, leading to unrest among peasants and cities alike. Religious and cultural changes accelerated amid this chaos. Traditional Roman paganism struggled to maintain its hold as mystery religions and Eastern cults gained popularity. Christianity, despite occasional persecutions, continued to spread, offering hope and community to many during uncertain times. Its message of salvation and equality increasingly appealed to a population weary of war and instability. Amid the crisis, several emperors attempted reforms to stabilize the empire. Emperor Diocletian, their 284 305 CE, introduced sweeping changes, dividing the empire into eastern and western halves, governed by co-emperors in a system known as the Tetrarchy. This arrangement aimed to provide more effective administration and defense across Rome's vast territories. Diocletian also reformed taxation, currency, and the military, seeking to restore order and fiscal stability. However, these reforms only partially succeeded. The division of the empire laid the groundwork for the eventual permanent split between East and West. Moreover, political power struggles continued, and social unrest persisted. The Western Empire, in particular, grew weaker as barbarian invasions intensified, culminating in the sack of Rome in 410 CE by the Visigoths, a shocking blow to the once invincible city. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, remained more resilient, preserving Roman law, culture, and administrative systems for nearly 1,000 years beyond the fall of the West. This Byzantine Empire would become a beacon of classical civilization, Christianity, and imperial authority. The crisis of the 3rd century thus represents a turning point in Roman history, a time when the empire confronted existential threats on multiple fronts. Though battered and transformed, Rome endured, adapting through reform and cultural shifts. The challenges of this period reshaped the empire's political structures, economy, and society, setting the stage for the transition from antiquity to the medieval world. The resilience and adaptability demonstrated during these turbulent years underscore the complexity of the Roman Empire's legacy, a civilization that, despite profound crises, managed to influence the course of history for millennia. Following the turmoil of the crisis of the 3rd century, the Roman Empire entered a period of reorganization and gradual transformation under new leadership. The reforms initiated by Diocletian and continued by Constantine the Great profoundly altered the empire's political, social, and religious landscape, marking the transition from classical Rome to the late antique period. Diocletian's establishment of the Tetrarchy, dividing imperial authority among 2 senior emperors, Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, Caesars, sought to address the challenges of governing an enormous and diverse realm. This system aimed to provide localized rule, quicker military response, and stability through shared power. Although the Tetrarchy eventually dissolved due to power struggles, it introduced the concept of a more bureaucratic and hierarchical government that outlasted its creators. In 312 CE, Constantine rose to power after a decisive victory at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. His reign marked a turning point for the empire's religious orientation. Constantine's conversion to Christianity and the subsequent Edict of Milan in 313 CE, legalized the faith, ending centuries of persecution and beginning its rise to dominance. Christianity would eventually become the state religion, transforming the spiritual and cultural fabric of the empire. Constantine also founded a new imperial capital at Byzantium, renamed Constantinople, strategically located to control the eastern provinces and trade routes. This city would grow into a vibrant center of political power, culture, and Christianity, serving as the heart of the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire for centuries. Administratively, the empire saw further centralization and expansion of bureaucratic institutions. The emperor's role became increasingly autocratic, supported by a complex system of officials and administrators, managing everything from taxation to military logistics. The Senate's political influence diminished almost entirely, and the old republican ideals became largely symbolic. Economically, the empire struggled with ongoing challenges, including a declining population, disrupted trade networks, and the pressures of sustaining a large military and bureaucracy. Reforms attempted to stabilize the currency and regulate prices, but inflation and shortages persisted. Social stratification grew sharper, with a widening gap between wealthy elites and impoverished masses. The military itself evolved to meet new threats. The legions were supplemented by foederati, barbarian tribes enlisted as allies or mercenaries. This pragmatic but risky policy sometimes undermined imperial authority, as these groups retained their own leaders and loyalties. The empire's borders remained under constant pressure from migrating peoples and hostile tribes. Culturally, the late empire was a dynamic and diverse world. Roman law, art, and literature adapted to new realities, blending classical traditions with Christian themes and Eastern influences. Education, philosophy, and theology flourished, often centered around Christian institutions. The fusion of Greco-Roman heritage and Christian thought shaped the intellectual life of the empire and medieval Europe to come. Despite these transformations, the Western Roman Empire faced increasing difficulties. Political instability, economic decline, and repeated invasions by Germanic tribes, such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths, eroded imperial control. The traditional Roman world was fracturing, giving way to new kingdoms and cultures. In contrast, the Eastern Roman Empire under Constantinople retained much of Rome's administrative structures, cultural achievements, and military strength. It preserved classical learning, Roman law, and Christian theology, becoming a bastion of continuity amid Western fragmentation. As the Roman Empire progressed into the twilight of antiquity, the profound transformations it had undergone since the 3rd century CE accelerated, reshaping the very fabric of the Mediterranean world and laying the foundation for the medieval era. The late 4th and 5th centuries marked a period of tumultuous change as the once mighty Western Roman Empire unraveled amid internal decay, external pressures, and sweeping cultural shifts. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, evolved into a new political and cultural entity that preserved many Roman traditions while adapting to changing realities. The Western Roman Empire faced mounting difficulties that exposed the fragility beneath its grand exterior. Political authority weakened as emperors became increasingly figureheads or puppets under the control of powerful military leaders and barbarian chieftains. Civil wars and usurpations became common, further destabilizing an already weakened state. Economic decline compounded these woes. Agricultural production suffered from warfare and depopulation, trade routes were disrupted, and rampant inflation devalued currency. The growing reliance on heavy taxation alienated rural populations and contributed to social unrest. Perhaps most dramatically, the Western Empire confronted relentless invasions and migrations by Germanic tribes and other peoples seeking new homes or plunder. Groups such as the Visigoths, led by Alaric, sacked Rome itself in 410 CE, a catastrophic event that shocked the ancient world and symbolized the collapse of imperial invulnerability. The Vandals followed with a devastating sack of Rome in 455 CE, further shaking the foundations of Western authority. These invasions were not merely military defeats, but signaled the breakdown of Roman control over vast swathes of territory. The culmination of these pressures came in 476 CE, when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus. This event traditionally marks the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the end of classical antiquity in Western Europe. However, this transition was more a transformation than an abrupt end. Many Roman institutions, laws, and cultural practices survived in the successor kingdoms established by the barbarian elites, blending Roman and Germanic customs into new political formations. While the Western Empire crumbled, the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, endured and even flourished. Centered in the strategically situated and heavily fortified city of Constantinople, the Eastern Empire retained a strong bureaucracy, a disciplined military, and a thriving economy. Emperors such as Justinian sought to reclaim lost Western territories, achieving temporary successes in North Africa and Italy, and codified Roman law into the monumental Corpus Juris Civilis, which would influence legal systems for centuries. Byzantine art, theology, and scholarship preserved classical knowledge and Christian doctrine during times when much of Western Europe was fragmented and rural. Christianity had become the dominant force uniting the empire's diverse populations. The conversion of Constantine and the Edict of Milan had paved the way for Christianity's rise from persecuted sect to imperial religion. By the late empire, the church was not only a spiritual institution, but a major political player, owning lands, administering charity, and influencing imperial policy. The Bishop of Rome, known as the Pope, emerged as a central religious figure in the West, helping to shape the medieval papacy. The fusion of Roman political ideals and Christian theology forged a new cultural identity that would dominate Europe for centuries. The transformation from Roman antiquity to the medieval world was gradual and complex. Latin evolved into the Romance languages, and Roman legal principles formed the basis for many European legal codes. Urban centers gave way to feudal manors as rural aristocracies gained power, yet cities like Rome, Constantinople, and Alexandria remained hubs of religious and cultural life. The architectural legacy of Rome inspired the Romanesque and Renaissance styles, and Roman engineering marvels continued to influence construction and infrastructure. Although the Western Empire fell politically, its cultural and institutional legacies endured deeply, shaping European civilization's foundations. The Eastern Empire preserved and adapted Roman traditions for nearly a millennium more, bridging antiquity and the medieval world. This dual legacy of Rome, both Western and Byzantine, ensured that Roman law, governance, art, and Christianity would profoundly influence the trajectory of Western and Near Eastern history. With the formal end of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, many might have expected the total disappearance of Roman influence from the European landscape. Yet rather than vanishing, the essence of Rome persisted, transformed and adapted by the new political realities and cultural currents of the early medieval period. This chapter explores how Roman institutions, culture, law, and ideas lived on, shaping the world that emerged from the ruins of imperial authority. The immediate aftermath of Rome's political collapse saw the rise of various Germanic kingdoms, such as the Ostrogoths in Italy, the Visigoths in Spain, the Franks in Gaul, and the Vandals in North Africa, each blending Roman administrative practices with their own traditions. Roman cities, though diminished in population and influence, remained centers of commerce, law, and culture. Many barbarian rulers sought legitimacy by adopting Roman titles, laws, and administrative methods, effectively continuing Roman governance under new leadership. One of the most enduring legacies was Roman law, the Corpus Juris Civilis, codified under Emperor Justinian in the East, preserved and systematized centuries of Roman legal thought. This legal corpus became the foundation of civil law traditions in many European countries centuries later. Even in the West, fragments of Roman legal principles survived, influencing medieval rulers and the church as they administered justice. Christianity emerged as a unifying cultural and political force in the post-Roman world. The church inherited much of Rome's administrative structure, becoming a central institution in governance, education, and social welfare. Monasteries preserved classical knowledge through manuscript copying and served as centers of learning. The bishopric of Rome evolved into the papacy, claiming spiritual authority over Western Christendom and becoming a powerful political actor. Christian theology and philosophy intertwined with Roman traditions, influencing art, law, and society. Language also reflected Rome's enduring influence. Latin, the language of administration, literature, and liturgy, remained the lingua franca of educated Europe throughout the medieval period. It evolved into the Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, spoken by millions today. Latin's persistence in the church and academia ensured that Roman intellectual heritage continued to shape European thought. Architecturally and artistically, Roman styles influenced medieval constructions, from basilicas to fortifications. Roman engineering knowledge, such as road building and aqueducts, remained vital for centuries. The Roman emphasis on civic life, public spaces, and legal order inspired the governance ideals of emerging medieval polities. Despite these continuities, the world that arose after Rome was also distinctly new. Feudalism emerged as the dominant social and political system, emphasizing local lordship, vassalage, and decentralized power. The urbanized cosmopolitan world of Rome gave way to a more rural agrarian society. Yet even in this new order, Roman ideas of law, citizenship now intertwined with Christian identity, and governance cast a long shadow. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, played a crucial role as the preserver of Roman heritage and Christianity. Its political structures, Legal codes and cultural achievements influenced both the Islamic world and Western Europe, particularly during the Crusades and the Renaissance. The Byzantine Empire served as a bridge between antiquity and the medieval world, ensuring that Rome's legacy endured across centuries and continents. The story of Julius Caesar and the Roman Empire is a tale of ambition, power, transformation, and legacy that is echoed through the millennia, shaping the course of Western civilization and human history. From Caesar's rise through military brilliance and political acumen to his dramatic assassination, and from the empire's sprawling dominance under Augustus to its eventual transformation into the Byzantine Empire and medieval kingdoms, Rome's influence is vast and enduring. Julius Caesar's life was marked by extraordinary achievements and profound contradictions. As a general, he expanded Rome's territories, securing victories in Gaul that extended Rome's reach and brought immense wealth. His crossing of the Rubicon River in 49 BCE was a bold declaration of civil war that challenged the very foundation of the Roman Republic. His reforms, whether political, social, or economic, sought to address Rome's inequalities and governance challenges, but also concentrated power in his own hands, alienating many senators. His assassination on the Ides of March, 44 BCE, was not just a violent end to a man, but a dramatic moment of crisis for Rome. It symbolized the struggle between the old republican order and the forces pushing toward imperial autocracy. Though the conspirators hoped to restore the republic, Caesar's death plunged Rome into a new era of civil wars and chaos, ultimately culminating in the rise of Augustus and the establishment of the Roman Empire. Augustus, Caesar's adopted heir, cleverly balanced power with appearances, laying the groundwork for centuries of imperial rule. His reign ushered in the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace, stability, and prosperity that allowed arts, culture, and infrastructure to flourish across the empire's vast territories. Roman roads, aqueducts, law, and governance systems knitted together diverse peoples into a cohesive whole, and the empire became a beacon of civilization and order. Yet the empire was not without its challenges. The pressures of governing vast lands, managing diverse populations, and defending long frontiers required constant adaptation. Over time, political instability, economic troubles, and external invasions weakened the Western Roman Empire, leading to its fall in 476 CE. However, Rome's eastern half, centered in Constantinople, endured for nearly 1,000 more years, preserving Roman law, culture, and Christian faith, and acting as a bridge between antiquity and the medieval world. Rome's legacy extends far beyond military conquests or political systems. Its innovations in law continue to influence legal frameworks worldwide. The Roman concept of citizenship and republican ideals inspired modern democracies. Latin, the language of Rome, shaped the Romance languages and enriched vocabulary in law, science, and literature. Architecturally, Roman engineering feats still awe us today, from monumental amphitheaters to enduring bridges and aqueducts. Christianity's rise within the Roman world transformed not only religion but also social and cultural life, with the Church becoming a central institution in European history. The fusion of Roman governance and Christian doctrine shaped medieval and modern societies, underscoring Rome's profound and complex influence. Reflecting on Julius Caesar himself, his story teaches enduring lessons about leadership, ambition, and the delicate balance of power. His life encapsulates the opportunities and dangers of extraordinary influence, the ability to change history, but also the vulnerability to forces resistant to change. His legacy is a reminder of the tensions between individual ambition and collective governance that resonate even today. As we look back on the vast sweep of Roman history, from the Republic's struggles to the empire's grandeur and eventual transformation, we see a civilization that shaped the foundation of the modern world. The achievements and failures of Rome continue to inspire caution and illuminate human endeavors across time and place. Thank you for joining us on this epic journey through history. If you've enjoyed learning about Julius Caesar and the Roman Empire, don't forget to subscribe to History Release for more insightful explorations of the past. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode.